So you want to get into classics, you absolute freak. Well, if you insist, let's see what we can do. Hello and welcome to Spinster's Library. I'm Claudia and I've been into classics for a while. Most of the books I talk about on this channel are classics. So if you have a vague notion of wanting to get into classics, maybe as a New Year's resolution or just for the hell of it, you're in the right place. Here's your 5-step guide for how to get into classics in 2025 or any other time you feel like it. Step 1. Figure out why you want to read classics. Is it because you feel like you're missing out on centuries worth of literature? Is it because you just want to see what the hype is about? Is it because you feel a craving to dive deep into the works that have inspired the human imagination like no other? Or is it because you want to show off at dinner parties? Do people actually talk about the classics at dinner parties? I wouldn't know. I don't have a social life. You might think that some of the reasons above are more valid than others. Well, you're wrong. Any reason to pick up a classic is a good one as far as I'm concerned. Whether you want to ace your English literature class or act more sophisticated than you have any right to be, or whether you want to put Bronte quotes in your Tinder profile. Whatever it is that gets you to pick up a classic is just fine. But be aware that if your sole motivation for wanting to read classics is so that you can look smart, you might not end up actually enjoying the books you pick. Then again, maybe you will. Maybe you start reading classics because you want to show off and accidentally stumble across a passion for romantic poetry that way. You never know. The reason why you want to get into classics will also influence the choice you make with regards to which books you're going to read. So before we get into the matter any deeper, take a moment to verbalize your motivations. While you do that, let me tell you what actually got me interested in classics. And that was primarily a desire to understand the past. Classics are books that were written decades and centuries ago. And as someone deeply interested in history, there's nothing like experiencing the past through the words of someone who lived it. I have a particular interest in 19th century Britain, so a lot of my favorite books are from the Regency and Victorian eras. Anyway, your motivations are your own, but as soon as you know what they are, we can move on to step number 2. Figure out what you like in a classic. First, you need to know what exactly counts as a classic. That's really easy. Okay, I lied. It's not easy at all. There's so many different ways to define a classic. I once made a half-hour video essay discussing exactly that. But we can't faff about with that today, so here's the TLDR. A classic is honestly any old book. I count any book written before 1960 as a classic. You disagree? Fine. Go and watch my video on the question what is a classic and then get back to me about that. For what it's worth, you can define a classic however the hell you want. But if you want my advice, and obviously you do or you wouldn't have clicked on this video, don't be too restrictive about it. Don't stick to one list or one collection of classics because you might be missing out on a lot of really good books by ignoring those more obscure titles that might not have made the 100 classics you need to read before you die type lists. Alright, let's talk about taste. You probably already have a personal taste in books. The good thing is that very much applies to your taste in classics too. I can promise you that everything you like in your favorite contemporary books will have equivalents in classics as well. Whether you like crime thrillers or romance novels or books about girl trips to Italy. Do you like stories about class or boarding schools or ghosts? Do you like a fast pace or a slow one? Zombies, the apocalypse? Maybe have a little look at the contemporary books you enjoy and try to put your reading tastes into words. This is easier for me than for most of you because I've been talking about books on this channel for years and years. But let me show you what I mean. This here, for example, is one of my all-time favorite modern novels, The Remains of the Day by Kazuo Ishiguro. I'm using the word modern very loosely because this book is in fact older than me. It was published in 1989, and therefore is by my own definition not a classic. So it does well enough as an example. The things I love about this contemporary-ish book are, in no particular order, a slow pace, a focus on characterization, a clever sense of humor, an English country house setting, commentary on class and gender, a subtlety in the writing style that keeps the emotion just under the surface until the right moment when it comes out to punch you right in the face. Glorious. If I take just that list and apply it to classics, well, there are quite a few books that fit the brief. Pretty much the entire canon of Jane Austen's and Ian Forster's works, for example. So figure out what your taste is in modern books first, then try and find classics that match it. But how do you know which classics will be to your taste before you've read them? Don't worry, we'll get to that in step number 3. Find your first classic. With quite literally centuries worth of literature out there, there is so much choice. So how do you find the perfect first book to start with, even once you've figured out your personal taste? You might want to create what we in the business call a TBR, a list of books to be read. Though that doesn't mean that once you've made it, you have to read every single book on that TBR. Consider it more a shortlist, a pool of possibilities you can dive into whenever you feel like it. There's a few ways you can go about finding books for such a shortlist. YouTube is one of them. There's thousands of videos out there about classics, full of recommendations for every possible taste. I've made a few of those recommendations videos in the past, including classic book recommendations for YA readers, page-turning classics for the easily distracted, and if you like Fleabag, you'll love these classic novels. I'll link you to those down below, but there's many more videos on many more YouTube channels. Have a little browse, watch a few videos and start making your TBR. Another suggestion I like to make, and one that's gotten me in trouble with fellow readers before, is to watch adaptations. Yes, before you read the book. Why? I'm so glad you asked. Firstly, it takes much less time to watch an adaptation than it does to read a whole book, even a 6 to 10 part miniseries. Secondly, while no adaptation is perfect, the vast majority of them do give you a good idea of what the book is about and are a decent indicator as to whether you'll enjoy the book or not. Thirdly, if you watch an adaptation and then read the book will be much easier to understand. This is particularly advantageous if you're new to classics and the classic you've chosen is of the more dense variety. So yeah, have at it. See what's on offer on your streaming service of choice. Or if you want to be even more, what's a word for lazy, but like positive, efficient about it, then have a look at trailers or YouTube reaction videos. Next, I suggest that in the creation of your TBR, you read widely but shallowly. Does that make sense? Try out as many books as you can before picking the ones you actually want to read. Luckily for you, it's really easy to find classics to just try out. Many of them are available online completely for free, since the clutches of copyright law don't reach back more than a century. All you need to do to find an out-of-copyright classic is to type the title into Google, followed by the magic words full text. There's also apps you can get for your phone that act as libraries of classics. One of my favorites, and one that I've reviewed on this channel before, is an app called Serial Reader. This is entirely unsponsored, by the way, they don't even know I exist. The app itself lets you pick from a huge selection of classics and then breaks each book down into roughly 20-minute chunks, with the intention of having you do a little bit of reading every day. In a world of badly designed money-grabbing apps, this truly is a gem. It's also completely free. Do check out my review of this app for more details about it. Also, libraries exist. And the classics section is one I can guarantee is going to be both well stocked and in little demand. You can browse to your heart's content, read a page here and a chapter there, just to find out what appeals to you in terms of writing style. Classics sometimes can take a little while to get to the meat of the story. A disappointing number of them start with a long, dull chapter of background info, a family chronicle, or some rather dry world building, So my suggestion would be to read 2 chapters or about 30 pages before you give up on a book. But do move on if you read that and find you're not enjoying it. There's no point in forcing yourself to read a classic just because everyone else says it's brilliant. Trust me, I've been there, done that. So after dipping into a few classics that way, you might have found a book you really want to read cover to cover. That's where we get to step number 4. Procure your classic. The good thing is that buying classics is both cheaper and more fun than buying contemporary books. For a start, you usually have a lot of different editions to pick from, whereas with contemporary literature, there's usually just the one, or if the book is a bit older, there's the hardback or the paperback. Classics also have a habit of cluttering up charity shops and secondhand bookshops, where they're usually sold for very little money. For the price of one new hardback novel, if you're lucky, you can get about a dozen classics in a charity shop. As an example, let's look at my own collection for a moment, and in particular at one of my all-time favorite novels, The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. This is the very first edition of it that I owned. I bought it as a teenager in the early days of online shopping. It took about a month and a half to arrive and was shipped, I believe, from America. I've not treated this particularly well over the years. You can see how the spine and the cover are all faded. It's also a complete edition of Wilde's writing, including all of his plays, his essays, his fairy tales, and his truly atrocious early poetry, as well as his only novel, The Picture of Dorian Gray. Honestly, I'm impressed with my teenage self that I even made it through this book in this edition, because it's not the easiest to read, being an enormously heavy and unwieldy sort of book. The next edition I bought of it was this one. It's a German translation from the early 1920s, and I found it in a charity shop where it cost me all of €1. It's a cloth-bound edition that looks like this on the inside. Obviously, I have not read this book cover to cover, nor do I intend to. It's a really cool item to own, at least if you operate under the same definition of cool as I do, which, thinking about it, you probably don't. Anyway, I'm so glad I found this. It's a unique edition of a favorite book, and just owning this makes me happy, even though I don't intend to actually read it. So a few years ago, I fancied a reread of Dorian Gray, and in particular, I fancied annotating it. I wasn't going to use the 2 editions of it that I already had, so I went online and I bought a cheap paperback edition, this one. I actually really hate this cover. I don't care for the shade of orange, I find the design quite ugly, but it was perfect for annotating because I didn't need to worry about defacing a beautiful object. So this edition too served its purpose. And finally, I bought myself this Penguin cloth-bound edition. If you spend any amount of time in online book spaces, you will come across these. They are seriously hyped, and I understand why. They feel like luxurious objects with the simple but striking cover designs, the tactile nature of the linen binding. They're nice on the inside too. The paper is thick and quite smooth, and the font is nicely spaced and very legible. However, they're not the sturdiest of books. I don't know if you can see it here, but this is the damage from me dropping the book once. And also, see how the text on the cover is peeling away? I bought this less than a decade ago, and I've read it exactly once since, and it's already looking a bit worse for wear. I get the feeling that these are made more to be collector's pieces than books you're actually supposed to read. So what was the purpose of this show and tell? Yes, to demonstrate how the choice of edition is going to have an impact on your reading experience. So when you search for classics in your local bookshop or the library or the charity shop, make sure to open them up and look inside. Oh, we haven't even touched on audiobooks yet. Let's touch on audiobooks. Audiobooks exist and they're brilliant. Some classics, just by virtue of being really old books, are a bit inaccessible to the modern reader. It's even worse when the authors insist on writing in dialect or use run-on sentences that span several pages or archaic spellings of words. That's where audiobooks come in handy, because a good narrator can make even the densest books much more accessible and enjoyable. And what's even better, audiobooks of classics are often free. I'm not shilling for Amazon here, but I need to mention that Audible has a decent collection of really good audiobooks that are included for free with their membership. With audiobooks though, just like with paper books, make sure you try before you commit. Listen to samples, try out different narrators, and figure out which ones you like the voice and style of. I hope you've been taking notes because we are now ready for the fifth and final step, which is step number 5, don't make it a chore. I cannot stress this enough. Even if you're only reading classics to show off at those fancy dinner parties you're insisting on attending, you're not going to stick with it if it feels like an obligation. Classics have the unfortunate downside of coming with a lot of connotations. When we think of them, we think of school, we think of analysis, we think of this idea that classics are somehow more than other books, that there's a depth to them we need to understand. Forget all of that. Read classics like you read any other book. Read them for the story. Read them for the enjoyment of reading. Read them for their entertainment value, or read them to have your heart broken by them. Don't expect them to change your life. Don't expect them to reveal universal truths about the human condition. Don't expect them to make you smarter. If you drop all of those expectations, you also drop the pressure. Take classics off the pedestal and put them on your bookshelf right next to your favorite contemporary books, because that's where they belong. Allow yourself to love or hate classics like any other book. This also means take the liberty to put a book away if it doesn't speak to you. You don't have to finish every book you start. Engage in community. Talk about the books you like or the ones you don't. Don't be intimidated by the opinions of others. It's totally fine to hate a book that everyone else says is perfect. Write bad reviews on Goodreads if it helps. Feel free to blacklist an author if you just don't connect to their writing. Argue about books, even the ones that feel too big, too important to argue over. There's no such thing, and as trite as it sounds, your opinion is valid. Don't force yourself. I'm of the conviction that there's at least one classic out there for every single reader. But if you never find yours, if you just can't get on with classics no matter how much you try, that's absolutely fine. Don't read classics. You're not any less well read for it. You're not any less smart or any less sophisticated for not enjoying old books. We read books for fun, for joy. If a classic doesn't bring you joy, there's nothing wrong with Marie Kondoing it right into the charity shop donations box. Right, is there anything else I need to say? Yes, don't read the introductions before you've read the book. Like, ever. You will get spoiled and you will regret it. Thank you for watching. Bye.